Welcome to Story Tales. Please like this video and subscribe to Story Tales. I hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin.
Lois Navarro stood outside the sprawling mansion she once called home, rain soaking through her thin jacket. Her fingers trembled as she pressed the doorbell one last time. No answer, just like the previous 7 attempts. "They can't ignore me forever," she whispered, her voice breaking, but they could, and they were. Through the ornate windows, she caught a glimpse of movement, the silhouette of her mother, Margaret, deliberately drawing the curtains close. Lois's stomach clenched. Just 3 days ago, she'd been the heir apparent to the Navarro hotel empire, her future secured. Now she was locked out, disowned, her name dragged through mud. All because of Florence. "Miss, you need to leave." A security guard approached, his face a practiced mask of professional indifference. "The family has instructed that you're not welcome here." "My family," Lois corrected, her voice hardening despite the tears threatening to spill. "That's my family in there." The guard's expression softened momentarily. "Not anymore, according to Mr. Navarro. Please don't make this difficult." As if on cue, the front door opened. Lois's heart leapt, then crashed as her sister Florence appeared, wrapped in a cashmere robe, a smug smile playing on her perfectly painted lips. "Still here? God, you're pathetic." Florence examined her manicure, not bothering to look Lois in the eye. "The evidence was clear. You stole from the company, from our parents. Everyone knows the truth now. You planted that evidence." Lois stepped forward, stopped only by the guard's restraining hand. "You framed me." "Oh, grow up." Florence rolled her eyes. Always the victim. Always the perfect daughter who could do no wrong. "Well, look at you now." Lois felt something shift inside her, hardening, like concrete setting. "Florence, when I prove what you did, you won't." Florence's smile widened. "And even if you tried, who would believe you? The disgraced daughter, thrown out like trash." She turned to go back inside, then paused. "By the way, I've already moved into your office. The view is spectacular." The door slammed shut. The security guard's grip loosened. "Miss, your things." He gestured to a small suitcase by the gate, all that remained of her life here. "I'm sorry." Lois stood frozen in the rain, staring at her childhood home, now a fortress against her. 18 years of memories, of being the golden child, the brilliant daughter who would take the Navarro name to greater heights, all erased by her sister's jealousy and her parents' willingness to believe the worst. She picked up the suitcase. It weighed almost nothing. Just clothes. No photos, no mementos, nothing to prove she'd ever been Lois Navarro, heir to millions at AS. She walked away. Each step heavier than the last, her phone buzzed. The only person who might still care. "Lenny," she answered, her voice hollow. "Lois, where are you? I heard what happened." Lenny Reyes's voice came through, concerned and solid. Her friend since childhood, the son of one of the hotel's longtime employees. The only person who'd seen through Florence's perfect facade. "They threw me out." The words tasted like ash. Florence won. "For now," Lenny said firmly. "Where are you going?" "You need somewhere to stay." Lois looked back at the mansion one last time. The rain had stopped, and weak sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the Navarro name on the gate. "I don't know," she admitted. Then something stirred in her chest, not hope, something colder and sharper. "But I know what I'm going to do." "What's that?" Lois gripped her phone tighter. "I'm going to take everything from them. Everything." 3 weeks later, Lois sat in a shelter, staring at a help-wanted ad for a housekeeping position at a budget motel. How far she'd fallen. "You apply for that job, and I'll personally drag you out of there by your ear," Lenny said, sliding into the seat across from her. His dark eyes were serious beneath his perpetually messy hair. "I need money, Lenny. Any money." Lois folded the newspaper, her movements precise. Control what you can control that had become her mantra. Pride doesn't pay for food. Neither does wasting your talents scrubbing toilets. Lenny pushed a folder toward her. I have a better idea. Lois raised an eyebrow. I'm not doing anything illegal. Would I ever? He grinned, then grew serious. Look, my cousin works for Stellar Investments. They need an analyst with your skills. It's entry-level, but they'd never hire me. The Navarro scandal was all over the news. Lenny's smile returned, sly and confident. That's why you're applying as Lois Reyes, my cousin from New York. I've got you a clean ID and references. Lois stared at him. You're serious? Dead serious. New name, new start. Lenny leaned forward. Use what they taught you against them. Your parents built an empire on ruthless business moves. Now it's your turn. Lois opened the folder. Inside was a complete identity driver's license, social security card, references, all expertly forged. This is a felony, she whispered. Only if we get caught. And we won't. Lenny's voice dropped. Your sister took everything from you. Your parents threw you away without a second thought. You owe them nothing. Lois ran her fingers over the new ID. Lois Reyes, a woman with no past, no family name weighing her down. No expectations except the ones she set for herself. When's the interview? She asked, and Lenny's face broke into a wide grin. Tomorrow at 9. Wear that blue dress you have. It screams competent, but not threatening. As he detailed the plan, Lois felt the cold knot inside her grow denser, more focused. Florence had wanted her gone, invisible. Instead, she would become a ghost watching, waiting, building power from the shadows. Her sister wouldn't see her coming until it was too late. 10 years passed in a blur of 18-hour workdays, calculated risks, and ruthless determination. Lois stood at the window of her downtown office, watching Miami glitter beneath her. Her reflection showed a woman, transformed, tailored suit, sharp bob, eyes that gave nothing away. At 28, she had climbed from entry-level analyst to founder of her own investment firm, with a specialization in hospitality acquisitions. Her phone buzzed. Lenny, tell me we got it, she answered without preamble. We got it. His voice held the same excitement it had when they were kids sneaking into hotel pools. The board accepted your offer 10 minutes ago. The Royale is yours. Lois closed her eyes, savoring the moment. The Royale Miami's most exclusive hotel, the crown jewel of the city's hospitality industry. The place where her sister hosted her ridiculous parties, flaunting the wealth and status that should have been shared between them. Any issues with the blind trust setup? She asked. She'd purchased the hotel through a complex web of shell companies and trusts, ensuring the Navarro family wouldn't discover the identity of the new owner. None. As far as the world knows, Sun Coast Holdings acquired the Royale. Lenny paused. Your sister has a birthday event booked there next month. I know. Lois opened her eyes, watching a cruise ship slide into the harbor below. Tell management not to change a thing. Let her plan her party. You're not going to cancel it. Cancel. Lois smiled, a cold, sharp expression that never reached her eyes. No, I want a front row seat when she learns who really owns the playground she's been showing off in. She ended the call and turned to her desk, where the acquisition papers waited. With a steady hand, she signed each page, officially claiming a piece of what should have been her birthright. The last decade hadn't been easy. After getting the analyst job through Lenny's connections, she'd worked like a woman possessed, learning everything about finance, investment, and property management. While Florence partied and spent their parents' money, Lois built her knowledge, her connections, her power. She started small, flipping, struggling businesses, turning them profitable, then selling at a premium. Each success led to bigger opportunities. Each failure taught her to be more ruthless, more focused, Now she controlled a portfolio worth over $200 million, all built from nothing, all built with one purpose: to reclaim what Florence had stolen and crush her sister in the process. Her intercom buzzed. "Ms. Reyes, your 4 o'clock is here." "Thank you, Anna. Send him in." The door opened, admitting Roger Mills, the Royale's general manager. He entered with the careful deference of someone meeting a new boss who could fire him on a whim. "Ms. Reyes, it's a pleasure to finally meet you in person." He extended his hand. Lois shook it firmly. "Please sit. I assume you've been briefed on the change in ownership." Mills nodded, settling into the chair across from her desk. "Yes, though I admit the arrangement is unusual. The staff is anxious about potential changes. For now, everything stays the same." Lois slid a folder across to him. "With one exception. These are instructions regarding Florence Navarro's upcoming birthday celebration." Mills scanned the document, his eyebrows rising. "You want to attend?" "Incognito." "I want to observe." Lois leaned back, her expression neutral. "Ms. Navarro has a reputation. I need to understand our high-profile clients firsthand." "Of course." Mills hesitated. "But if I may, there's something you should know about the Navarro family." Lois kept her face carefully blank. "Oh, they're difficult clients, especially the daughter, Florence. Demands special treatment, berates staff." He cleared his throat. "Just last month, she had a housekeeper fired for entering her suite during the wrong hour, despite that being the time Ms. Navarro herself had requested." "I see." Lois felt a flicker of savage satisfaction. Florence hadn't changed, still the same entitled, cruel person who destroyed her life. "Thank you for the warning. I'll be prepared." After Mills left, Lois returned to the window. Somewhere in the city, Florence was planning her birthday extravaganza, unaware that her favorite playground now belonged to the sister she discarded. Lois picked up a photo from her desk, the only personal item in the otherwise minimalist office. A young Lenny and Lois at her 18th birthday, before everything fell apart. The last day she'd been in Navarro. "Almost time," she whispered to her younger self. A decade of waiting, planning, building her strength in secret. A decade of watching Florence from afar, collecting her weaknesses like precious gems. The revenge she'd dreamed of for 10 years was finally within reach. The Royale buzzed with activity, staff rushing to perfect every detail of the most extravagant event of the season. Florence Navarro's 32nd birthday party, rumored to cost over $150,000, had drawn celebrities, business moguls and Miami's elite, all eager to be seen at the social event of the year. Lois slipped through the service entrance, nodding to the security guard who recognized her as the owner's representative. She wore a simple black dress, elegant but deliberately understated. Nothing that would draw attention. "Everything ready?" she asked the event manager, a nervous young woman clutching a tablet like a shield. "Yes, Ms. Reyes. The champagne fountain is functioning, the ice sculptures are in place, and the band is doing final sound checks." The woman glanced toward the ballroom. Ms. Navarro arrived early to inspect everything. She's not pleased with the floral arrangements. "I'll handle it," Lois said, though she had no intention of doing any such thing. "You've done excellent work." The manager's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Thank you. Oh, and Mr. Reyes is waiting for you in the security office as requested." Lois found Lenny surrounded by monitors, looking oddly professional in a suit. 10 years in business had polished his rough edges, but his eyes still held the same mischievous gleam. "There she is," he said, pointing to a screen showing Florence berating a flower arranger. "Still making people miserable." Lois watched her sister, older now, but still beautiful in that cold, perfect way. Her designer gown probably cost more than what some of the staff earned in a year. "Her parents?" Lois asked, her voice carefully neutral. She hadn't seen Thomas and Margaret Navarro in person since that rainy day outside the mansion. Lenny switched to another camera. VIP lounge. Your father's drinking already. Lois didn't correct the your. Despite everything, she couldn't fully sever the connection. They were still her parents, even if they had failed her completely. Here. Lenny handed her an envelope. The contract, as requested. And this, he pressed a small device into her palm, is a direct link to the sound system. Press it when you're ready. Lois slipped both items into her clutch. How do I look? Lenny studied her, like someone about to burn down the world. She smiled, more genuine than usual. Perfect. The ballroom of the Royale had been transformed into a winter wonderland, despite Miami's tropical heat. Ice sculptures glittered, white roses cascaded from crystal vases, and champagne flowed freely from a fountain in the center of the room. A live band played softly, nearly drowned out by the chatter of Miami's wealthiest residents. Lois moved through the crowd unnoticed. No one recognized the disgraced Navarro daughter in the poised woman sipping champagne in the corner. 10 years was a long time, and she'd been careful to stay out of the public eye. She spotted her parents holding court near the band. Thomas Navarro, still imposing despite the gray, now dominating his dark hair. Margaret, thin and elegant, laughing too loudly at something younger man had said. Neither looked like they had spent a single moment regretting what they'd done to their younger daughter. And then there was Florence, the star of the evening, swanning through the crowd in a gown that seemed designed to outshine everyone else. She air-kissed cheeks, accepted lavish gifts with practiced modesty, and periodically checked to ensure photographers captured her best angles. "Isn't she magnificent?" a woman beside Lois gushed. "Florence Navarro practically owns this city." Lois didn't respond, her eyes fixed on her sister. Florence had everything their parents love, the family fortune, respect, admiration. Everything that should have been shared between them, not for much longer. Lois checked her watch. Almost time. She moved closer to the center of the room, positioning herself where Florence couldn't miss her. Right on cue, Florence turned and spotted her. For a moment, there was no recognition, just the automatic dismissal reserved for anyone who wasn't important enough to know. Then her eyes narrowed. Lois raised her champagne glass in a mocking toast to Florence's perfectly made-up face twisted in confusion, then shock, then disdain. She excused herself from her circle of admirers and stalked over, her smile tight and false. "Well," she hissed, low enough that only Lois could hear, "the prodigal sister returns. Crashing parties now. How pathetic." Lois met her gaze steadily. "Hello, Florence. Happy birthday. How did you get in here?" Florence's eyes darted around, searching for security. "You need to leave before you embarrass yourself further." "Actually, I was invited." Lois took another sip of champagne, in a manner of speaking. "Security." Florence's voice rose sharply, drawing attention. "Get this woman out of here. She's not on the guest list." 2 security guards approached, reluctantly. Lois recognized them as men who worked for her, who knew exactly who she was. "Miss, I'm going to have to ask you to." One began, following the script they'd rehearsed. "Wait." Florence's voice cut through the murmuring crowd. "This woman is my sister, a thief. She stole from our family business years ago." Her voice dripped with venom. "Security, get that homeless woman out of here." A hush fell over the crowd. Even the band stopped playing. All eyes turned to the confrontation. The guards hesitated, looking uncomfortable. Before they could act, Roger Mills appeared, holding out a document. "Miss Navarro," he said formally, "I think you should read this." Florence snatched the paper, her expression impatient. "What is this supposed to?" Her voice died as her eyes fell to the signature line. Lois savored the moment, watching the blood drain from her sister's face as she read the name at the bottom. Lois Navarro, owner and CEO. This must be a joke, Florence stammered, her voice rising hysterically. Some kind of sick prank. Lois stepped closer, close enough to smell her sister's expensive perfume. No joke, Flo. You're standing in my hotel. The crowd's murmurs grew louder. Phones appeared, recording the moment. Florence's perfect night was unraveling before her eyes, captured for social media posterity. Impossible, Florence whispered, her composure cracking. You have nothing. You're nothing. I have more than you can imagine. Lois plucked the contract from Florence's trembling fingers. And I think it's time your guests knew exactly who they're celebrating tonight. She pressed the device in her palm. The sound system crackled, then her voice filled the ballroom. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Royale. My name is Lois Navarro, owner and CEO. Tonight's event has been canceled, effective immediately. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone dropped a glass. The Royale has a strict policy against hosting events for people who mistreat others, Lois continued, her voice steady. On behalf of management, I apologize for the inconvenience. Florence lunged forward, trying to grab the microphone. You can't do this. Do you know who I am? Who my parents are? Lois stepped back. I know exactly who you are, Florence. Better than anyone. She nodded to the security guards. Please escort Ms. Navarro and her guests out. This is ridiculous. Florence shrieked as the guards approached. Mother, father, do something. Thomas and Margaret Navarro pushed through the stunned crowd, their faces ashen. Thomas reached them first, his expression thunderous. You own this place. His voice shook, whether from anger or shock, Lois couldn't tell. She met his gaze without flinching. Oh, I own a lot more than this. In the chaos that followed Florence screaming, guests whispering and recording, staff efficiently beginning the evacuation, Lois stood perfectly still, the eye of the hurricane she had created. 10 years of planning, of building herself from nothing, had led to this moment. It wasn't enough, not nearly enough to balance the scales. But as she watched her sister's carefully constructed image shatter before Miami's elite, Lois felt something like satisfaction stir in the cold place where her heart had been. It was only the beginning. The morning after Florence's disastrous birthday party, Lois sat in her office at the Royale, watching the aftermath unfold on social media. #Navarro Showdown was trending, with clips of Florence being escorted out while screaming threats viewed millions of times already. You've gone viral, Lenny said, dropping a stack of newspapers on her desk. Each front page featured some variation of the same story. Hotel heiress humiliated by long-lost sister. Lois flipped through them dispassionately. They got most of the details wrong. Does it matter? Lenny perched on the edge of her desk, grinning. Florence's reputation is in tatters. Mission accomplished, right? Lois looked up from the papers. That was just the opening move. Her phone rang, an unknown number. She put it on speaker. Lois Navarro, she answered, the family name still feeling strange on her tongue after years as Lois Reyes. You think you're clever. Florence's voice came through, tight with fury. You ambushed me, humiliated me in front of everyone who matters in this city. Karma's unpleasant, isn't it? Lois kept her voice even. Now you know how it feels. This little stunt will cost you, Florence hissed. When I'm done, you'll wish you'd stayed whatever gutter you crawled out of. Threats already? I expected more creativity. Lois nodded to Lenny, who was recording the call. Your problem, Florence, is that you still think you hold all the cards. You don't. Our parents threw me away on your word, Lois cut in, her composure finally cracking. They didn't ask questions, didn't investigate, just believed the worst and tossed me out like garbage. Because they knew who you really were, Florence snapped. The perfect daughter act never fooled me. Lois laughed, the sound sharp and humorless. Project much? We both know who the actress in the family is. This isn't over, Florence said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You've declared war. No, Florence. You declared war 10 years ago. I'm just finally fighting back. Lois ended the call, turning to Lenny. She'll go to our parents next. Already did. Lenny held up his tablet, showing a security feed. They're in the lobby demanding to see you. Lois stood, straightening her suit jacket. Let them wait 20 minutes, then send them up. Going for the power play, huh? Lenny raised an eyebrow. They taught me everything I know about business, Lois replied, moving to the window, including never giving up the psychological advantage. The 20 minutes stretched into 30 as Lois reviewed her strategy. When her intercom finally buzzed, she was perfectly calm. Your parents are here, her assistant announced. Send them in. Thomas and Margaret Navarro entered, looking out of place despite their expensive clothes. This was Lois's territory now. So it's true, Thomas said without preamble. You own the Royale. Among other properties, Lois replied, not offering them seats. What can I do for you? Margaret stepped forward, her hands twisting her designer purse. Lois, darling, this has gone far enough. What happened was unfortunate, but unfortunate. Lois repeated, her voice dangerously soft. Is that what we're calling it? You believed I stole from the company. You threw me out without a hearing, without proof, without even letting me defend myself. The evidence, Thomas began, was fabricated by Florence. We both know it. Lois turned to face the window, unable to look at them any longer. But that doesn't matter anymore. What matters is what happens next. Your sister is devastated, Margaret tried again. Her reputation, her standing in society. I don't care. Lois turned back, her expression hard. She took everything from me. Now I'm taking everything from her. Thomas's face darkened. You've made your point. Now let's be reasonable. You've had your revenge. It's time to put this behind us as a family. Lois's laugh was bitter. Family? You stopped being my family the day you chose her over me without a second thought. We did what we thought was right, Thomas insisted, his voice rising. You were always the responsible one. Florence needed more support, more. More of everything, Lois finished for him. More attention, more money, more chances. While I got exactly one strike before you decided I wasn't worth the Navarro name. Margaret dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Please, Lois, we can fix this. Come home. We'll make a public statement, welcome you back. I don't need your name anymore. Lois walked to her desk and pressed a button. The wall behind her lit up with a display of her holdings: hotels, restaurants, retail spaces across Miami. I built my own empire while you were coddling Florence through her 30s. I don't need a family that never wanted me. Thomas stared at the display, his business instincts taking over. How did you acquire all this? Where did you get the capital? I started with nothing, Lois said, each word precise. Not a penny from the Navarro fortune. I worked. I learned. I took risks. Everything your perfect Florence never had to do. This vendetta needs to end, Thomas said, his tone shifting to the one he used in board meetings. Name your price. My price. Lois raised an eyebrow. You think you can buy me off? Like I'm some problem to be solved with money. Then what do you want? Margaret asked, desperation creeping into her voice. Lois walked to her desk, retrieving a folder. I want you to understand exactly what your actions cost me. I want Florence to experience what I did losing everything overnight. She slid the folder toward them. And I want you to know that I've just acquired majority shares in Navarro Enterprises. Thomas snatched up the folder, his hands shaking slightly as he flipped through the documents. This is impossible. Is it? Lois smiled coldly. Your company's been underperforming for years. The stock was vulnerable. You were vulnerable. And now, the company you built belongs to me. Margaret gasped. You wouldn't strip you of power? Remove the Navarro name from the hotels. Lois tilted her head. I already did. The office door burst open. Florence stormed in, her face contorted with rage. You conniving little. Careful, Lois warned. You're trespassing on my property. Our property. Florence shrieked. Everything the Navarros built is now mine, Lois finished. Legally. Irrevocably. Florence lunged forward, but Thomas caught her arm. Florence, stop. This isn't helping. You need to fix this. Florence twisted in his grip, her perfect composure shattered. She's trying to destroy us. No, Lois corrected, her voice ice cold. I'm giving you a taste of your own medicine. You took everything from me. My family. My future. My identity. Now you get to see how it feels. Thomas released Florence, his business mind clearly calculating options. We'll fight this in court. You'll lose. Lois sat behind her desk, the gesture dismissive. Every transaction was legal. Every acquisition above board. Florence's scream of frustration echoed through the office. You wouldn't dare. Lois tilted her head. I already did. The day after confronting her family, Lois gathered the Royale staff in the grand ballroom. Rumors had been flying since Florence's disastrous party, and she needed to establish control. As you know, there's been a change in ownership, she began, standing tall despite the hundreds of curious eyes on her. I'm Lois Navarro, your new CEO. A murmur ran through the crowd. The name Navarro carried weight in Miami's hospitality industry. Some of you may have heard stories about me. Most of them are probably false. She allowed herself a small smile. What matters is this. The Royale has a bright future ahead, and you're all part of it. Roger Mills stepped forward. The staff has concerns about job security, Ms. Navarro. Understandable. Lois nodded. Let me be clear. I'm not here to clean house. I'm here to build on the excellent foundation you've created. In fact, she glanced at the papers in her hand, I've authorized a 15% raise for all staff, effective immediately. The murmur became excited chatter. Mills looked stunned. One more thing, Lois added. The Navarro family is no longer welcome on these premises. If any member attempts to enter, alert security immediately. As the staff dispersed, buzzing with the news, Lenny approached. Generous move with the raises. Good business, Lois replied. I need their loyalty. Her phone pinged with a news alert. She opened it to find a tabloid article. Florence Navarro dropped by 3 major brands following hotel scandal. It's starting, she murmured, passing the phone to Lenny. He whistled low. Fashion labels dropping her like a hot potato. That's gotta hurt. She built her entire identity on being a socialite and influencer. Lois started walking toward her office, Lenny falling into step beside her. Without that, who is she? No one, he said. Just like you were supposed to be. Lois's desk was covered with messages, business opportunities, interview requests, even party invitations from people who'd ignored her existence 24 hours ago. Vultures, she muttered, sweeping them aside. Get me the files on Navarro Enterprises' current projects. Lenny hesitated. You're really going after the whole company? Every last brick. Lois met his gaze steadily. They need to understand what they did. And after that, he leaned against the doorframe. When you've taken everything, what then? Lois didn't answer. She hadn't thought beyond revenge, couldn't imagine a future where the cold knot of hatred no longer drove her every decision. Before she could formulate a response, her assistant appeared in the doorway. Ms. Navarro, there's a situation in the lobby. Lois followed her to the security monitors. Florence stood in the center of the lobby, surrounded by paparazzi, giving what appeared to be an impromptu press conference. "Vicious lies and illegal business tactics," Florence was saying, her face a mask of righteous indignation. "My sister has waged a personal vendetta against our family. Cut the power to the lobby," Lois instructed the security chief. Now, the monitors went dark as the lobby plunged into confusion. Lois straightened her jacket and headed for the elevator. "Lois, wait," Lenny called after her. "Let security handle this." She ignored him. This confrontation was long overdue. The lobby was chaos, flashing camera lights cutting through the darkness. Security trying to herd the press toward the exits. Florence shouting demands over the confusion. Lois stepped out of the elevator, and a spotlight found her immediately. Camera lenses swiveled in her direction. "Ms. Navarro!" Several reporters called at once. "Can you respond to your sister's allegations?" Florence whirled toward her, eyes wild with fury. "There she is, the woman trying to destroy our family name." Lois approached slowly, deliberately, until she stood face to face with her sister. The cameras captured every moment. "The Royale has a strict policy against unauthorized press events," she said, her voice carrying in the sudden hush. "Security, please escort Ms. Navarro and her media friends off the property." "You can't silence me," Florence spat. "Everyone deserves to know what you're doing." "What I'm doing?" Lois kept her voice even, aware of the cameras. "I'm running my business." "You're trespassing." As security moved in, Florence grabbed Lois's arm. "This isn't over. I have connections you can't imagine. People who will stand by me." "Like who?" Lois removed Florence's hand with a deliberate motion. "The brands that just dropped you? The friends who are already distancing themselves? Face it, Florence. You're toxic now." The security team formed a barrier between them, gently but firmly guiding Florence toward the exit. She fought them, her designer dress tearing at the shoulder, her hair falling from its perfect arrangement. "You'll regret this," Florence shouted over her shoulder as they led her out. "I promise you that." Once they were gone, Lois addressed the remaining press with practiced calm. "The Royale will be making an official statement this afternoon. Until then, I have a hotel to run." Back in her office, she found Lenny watching the footage on his tablet. "You know this will be everywhere within the hour, right?" "Good." Lois sat heavily in her chair. "Let everyone see what happens when they cross me." "She looked unhinged," Lenny observed, "but dangerous." "She's always been dangerous." Lois stared at the frozen image of her sister's contorted face. The difference is now everyone can see it. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You've destroyed my life. I hope you're satisfied." Lois considered blocking the number, then decided against it. Better to know what Florence was thinking. She typed back, "I'm just getting started." 2 days after Florence's lobby meltdown, Lois called a board meeting at Navarro Enterprises. As majority shareholder, it was her right, though the other board members, mostly old friends of her father, were clearly uncomfortable with her presence. "Gentlemen, thank you for coming on such short notice," she began, taking the chair at the head of the table that had once been her father's. "I know this is unusual." "That's one word for it," muttered Harold Vance, her father's oldest ally. "Thomas built this company from nothing. You have no right." "I have every right," Lois cut in smoothly. "As the majority shareholder, I am entitled to make decisions regarding the company's future. That's not just my opinion, it's corporate law." The room fell silent. Thomas and Margaret sat at the far end, their faces grim. Florence was notably absent. "Where is my sister?" Lois asked, her tone conversational. "I expected her to attend." "You've done enough damage," Thomas snapped. "Leave her out of this." The way you left me out of family decisions for 10 years. Lois raised an eyebrow. Interesting double standard. Margaret's voice wavered. Lois, please. You've made your point. Now, let's put this behind us. Put it behind us. Lois leaned forward, her voice dropping. You threw me away like garbage. Now, I own the hotel chain you used to brag about. I don't need a family that never wanted me. She opened her briefcase, extracting a stack of documents. Now to business. I've reviewed the company's performance over the past decade. The results are... She paused for effect. Disappointing. Thomas's face darkened. We've been in a challenging market. You've been complacent, Lois corrected, relying on the Navarro name rather than innovation. It stops today. She distributed the documents to each board member. My proposal for restructuring. You'll note several significant changes, including a complete rebranding. Harold flipped through the pages, his face reddening. You're removing the Navarro name? After 60 years. The name is tainted, Lois replied calmly. Recent scandals have damaged its value. Scandals you created, Thomas growled. No, she said, meeting his gaze. Scandals Florence created and you enabled. I'm simply running a business. The conference room door burst open. Florence stormed in, looking disheveled and wild-eyed. Her media-perfect appearance had deteriorated remarkably in just a few days. You couldn't even wait for me, she demanded, glaring at Thomas. Your own daughter. Florence, Margaret rose, reaching for her. We didn't think that I should be here when she destroys everything. Florence shook off her mother's hand, turning her fury on Lois. Haven't you taken enough? Lois regarded her silently for a moment. Sit down, Florence. Since you're here, you might as well understand what's happening. I know exactly what's happening, Florence snarled. You're using your money to punish us, to hurt me. No, Lois said quietly. I'm using my business acumen to save a failing company. The fact that it hurts you is incidental. She turned back to the board members. Page 12 details the new executive structure. You'll notice several positions have been eliminated. Thomas flipped to the page, his face draining of color. You're firing me? From my own company. I'm retiring you, Lois corrected, with a generous severance package, contingent on a non-compete clause. Florence lunged forward, slamming her hands on the table. You wouldn't dare. Lois didn't flinch. I already did. The paperwork was filed this morning. The ensuing chaos was everything Lois had imagined during her years of planning. Florence screamed accusations. Thomas tried to rally the board members to his defense. Margaret wept silently. The board members looked on in shock and growing resignation. Through it all, Lois remained calm, answering questions with the precision of someone who had studied every aspect of the business she was dismantling. Finally, exhausted and defeated, Thomas slumped in his chair. Why not just sell the company? Why go through all this? Because I want you to watch, Lois said simply. I want you to see what I build from the ruins of what you created. Florence's screams had devolved into bitter, choking sobs. You did this, she spat at her parents. You destroyed this family. No, Florence. Lois stood, gathering her papers. You did that 10 years ago when you framed me. They just helped you finish the job. As she walked toward the door, Margaret called after her, Lois, please. We can still be a family. Lois paused, not turning back. We stopped being a family the day you decided Florence was worth more than me. The door closed behind her with a soft click that somehow felt more final than if she had slammed I in the hallway. Lenny waited, his expression concerned. How did it go? Exactly as expected, Lois replied, her voice hollow despite the victory. It's done. And how does it feel? Lois considered the question as they walked toward the elevator. The cold knot inside her hadn't dissolved as she'd expected. If anything, it felt heavier, denser. "It doesn't feel like enough," she admitted finally. "Nothing does." A month after the board meeting, Lois sat in her penthouse office, reviewing reports on the rebranded Navarro properties. Sunrise Hospitality Group, her creation, was flourishing under new management, with bookings up 15% across all locations. "The Miami Herald wants to do a profile," Lenny said, entering with his tablet. "From rags to riches, that whole angle." Lois shook her head. "No interviews." "It would be good publicity," he argued. "The public loves a comeback story." "This isn't about publicity." Lois turned back to her window, gazing at the skyline she now partly owned. "It's about justice." Lenny sighed, setting down his tablet. "Have you seen the latest on Florence?" Lois glanced at him. "Should I care?" "Probably not, but—" He pulled up a video on his tablet. "It's gotten worse." The video showed Florence outside a nightclub, clearly intoxicated, shouting at paparazzi. Her designer clothes were rumpled, her makeup smeared. "You want a story," she slurred in the footage. "How about how my sister stole my life? How she poisoned everyone against me?" Lois watched dispassionately. "Turn it off." "There's more," Lenny said, switching to another tab. "Her condo association is evicting her. Apparently, she hasn't paid maintenance fees in 3 months." That caught Lois's attention. "Financial problems already? That was faster than I expected. According to my sources, your parents froze her accounts after she tried to access corporate funds without authorization. They're in financial lockdown while the company reorganization happens. So they finally stopped enabling her," Lois mused. "Interesting." The intercom buzzed. "Ms. Navarro, security reports that your sister is in the lobby, demanding to see you." Lois exchanged glances with Lenny. "Send her up," she decided after a moment. This should be illuminating. When Florence arrived, the transformation was shocking. The woman who had always been perfectly groomed, perfectly dressed, perfectly controlled, now looked haggard and desperate. Her clothes were expensive but wrinkled, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, her eyes bloodshot. "Well," Lois said, leaning against her desk, "this is unexpected." Florence stalked into the office, her movements jerky. "Are you happy now? Are you satisfied?" "With what specifically?" Lois asked, her tone deliberately casual. "Don't play dumb." Florence paced the room like a caged animal. "My friends won't take my calls. My sponsors dropped me. The bank froze my credit cards. I can't even get a table at restaurants where they used to comp my meals." "Sounds challenging," Lois observed. "Almost like being suddenly cut off from everything you knew, having to start over with nothing. Familiar territory for me." Florence stopped pacing, her expression ugly. "You think this makes us even? You've systematically destroyed my life. The way you destroyed mine." Lois pushed off from the desk, taking a step closer. "The difference is, I didn't do anything to you that you didn't bring on yourself. I just made sure everyone saw who you really are." "What do you want from me?" Florence's voice cracked. "An apology? Fine. I'm sorry. Is that what you need to hear?" Lois studied her sister's face, searching for sincerity and finding none. "No. What I needed was a sister who didn't betray me, parents who didn't abandon me, a family who chose me as readily as they chose you." "So there's no fixing this," Florence concluded, her face hardening. "You won't be satisfied until I'm completely ruined." "I'm just letting the natural consequences of your actions unfold," Lois replied. "Everything that's happening to you now is the result of choices you made starting with framing me 10 years ago." Florence's laugh was bitter. "Oh, so self-righteous. You think you're better than me? Look at what you've done. You're exactly like me, willing to hurt anyone to get what you want. The accusation hit closer to home than Lois wanted to admit. She turned away, unwilling to let Florence see the doubt that flickered across her face. "Get out," she said quietly. "There's nothing for you here." "You've turned our parents against me," Florence continued, her voice rising again. "They're talking about a psychiatric evaluation, Lois, a conservatorship. Like I'm crazy for being upset about losing everything." Lois turned back, surprised. "I had nothing to do with that." "Bullshit." Florence's eyes flashed. "This is all part of your plan. You're not just taking what I had, you're making sure I have no way to rebuild." "That's not." Lois began, then stopped herself. Wasn't that exactly what she'd wanted? To make Florence feel the same helplessness she had felt. Florence's phone rang. She glanced at it, her expression crumpling. "It's Dad. Again. Probably calling to check if I've calmed down enough to discuss treatment options." For the first time, Lois felt the cold knot inside her shift uncomfortably. This hadn't been part of her plan, turning her parents so completely against Florence that they questioned her sanity. "Answer it," she found herself saying. Florence looked up, suspicious. "Why?" "Because despite everything, they're still your parents." The words tasted strange on Lois's tongue. "Don't make my mistakes." Florence stared at her for a long moment, then declined the call and shoved the phone back into her purse. "Don't pretend you care now. We both know you won't stop until I have nothing left." She moved toward the door, then paused. "You know what the worst part is? I spent my whole life competing with you, the perfect daughter, the brilliant one. And now that you've won, I realize the competition only existed in my head. You never even saw me as a rival until I made you one." The door slammed behind her, leaving Lois alone with thoughts she'd been avoiding for months. Lenny reappeared from the adjoining office where he'd been discreetly monitoring the conversation. "You okay?" Lois nodded automatically, then reconsidered. "I don't know. Did you hear about the psychiatric evaluation?" "Yeah." Lenny looked uncomfortable. "Apparently she had some kind of breakdown at their house. Broke a bunch of stuff, threatened to expose family secrets to the press." "Secrets?" Lois raised an eyebrow. "What secrets?" Lenny shrugged. "No idea. Could be nothing, just Florence lashing out." Lois turned back to the window, troubled by the unexpected turn of events. "This is getting messy. Personal in a way I didn't anticipate." "Revenge usually does," Lenny said quietly. "You still want to keep going? Push it to the end." Lois thought of Florence's haggard face, the desperation in her eyes. For a moment, she wavered. Then she remembered the rain soaking through her clothes as she stood outside the family mansion, begging to be heard. The nights in shelters, hungry and alone. The years of struggle, while Florence lived in luxury on the fortune that should have been shared between them. "Yes," she said finally. "We finished this." The following week, Lois received an unexpected call from her father. "We need to talk," Thomas said without preamble. "About Florence." "I have nothing to say about Florence," Lois replied, instantly on guard. "It's not what you think." His voice sounded tired, defeated. "Things have escalated. I need your help." Despite herself, Lois was curious. What kind of help? "Not over the phone." "Can you meet me?" "At the house." The Navarro mansion. Lois hadn't set foot there since the day they'd thrown her out. "Send the address to my assistant," she said, surprised at her own agreement. "I'll be there at 7. After ending the call, she sat motionless, staring at the phone. Was this a trap? Some desperate ploy by Florence? "Bad idea," Lenny said when she told him. "Very bad idea." "Probably," Lois agreed. "But I need to know what's happening." "Then I'm coming with you," Lenny insisted. "No arguments." The Navarro mansion looked exactly as Lois remembered: imposing, immaculate, cold. As Lenny parked in the circular driveway, she felt a strange vertigo, like stepping back in time. "You sure about this?" he asked, eyeing the house warily. "No," she admitted, "but I'm doing it anyway." The front door opened before they reached it. Thomas stood there, looking older than Lois remembered, the confident businessman replaced by a worn-out old man. "Lois." He nodded stiffly. "Thank you for coming." "This is Lenny Reyes," she introduced. "He stays with me, or I leave." Thomas's eyes flicked to Lenny, recognition dawning. Manuel's boy. From maintenance. "CFO now," Lenny corrected with a tight smile. "Things change." Thomas led them into the familiar foyer, then to his study, the inner sanctum, where Lois had once expected to learn the family business. Margaret waited inside, perched nervously on the edge of a chair. "Lois," she breathed, half rising. "You came." "I'm here to listen," Lois said, not moving to embrace her mother. "That's all." Thomas poured himself a drink, not offering one to his guests. "Florence has gone too far. She's threatening to go public with allegations against the family if we don't give her access to funds." "What kind of allegations?" Lois asked, taking a seat across from her mother. Margaret and Thomas exchanged glances. "Financial improprieties," Margaret said carefully, "dating back years." Lois raised an eyebrow. "And are these allegations true?" The silence that followed was answer enough. "I see," Lois said, understanding dawning. "So this isn't about Florence's mental health at all. It's about protecting the family from scandal." "It's more complicated than that," Thomas insisted. "Florence is unstable. But yes, her threats are concerning. What exactly do you want from me?" Lois asked, cutting to the chase. Thomas took a long swallow of his drink. "We need your help containing her. You control the company now. You could offer her a position, an allowance, something to keep her quiet." Lois stared at him in disbelief. "You want me to bribe my sister? The same sister who destroyed my life? The same sister you've enabled and protected for years?" "We're trying to protect the family name," Margaret pleaded. "Your name too, Lois." "My name?" Lois laughed bitterly. "The name you stripped from me? The name I had to reclaim on my own." Thomas slammed his glass down. "Damn it, Lois. This affects all of us. Florence knows things about the business, about deals we made." "Illegal deals," Lois guessed, watching her father's face confirm it. "Let me get this straight. Florence framed me for theft. You believed her without question and tossed me out. Now she's threatening to expose your actual crimes, and you want my help." "We made mistakes," Margaret whispered. "With both of you." "No." Lois shook her head. "You didn't make mistakes. You made choices. You chose Florence over me, again and again. Now you're facing the consequences." Thomas's face darkened. "She's going to destroy everything we built. Everything you now control." "Maybe it deserves to be destroyed," Lois said quietly. The study door opened suddenly. Florence stood there, her expression triumphant. "I knew it. I knew you'd take her side again." "Florence," Margaret rose, her voice placating. "We discussed this. You agreed to let us speak to Lois alone, so you could plot against me." Florence's voice rose hysterically. "Turn her against me even more." Lois stood, pieces falling into place. This wasn't about containing Florence at all, was it? This was a test, to see whose side I'd take. Thomas had the grace to look ashamed. "We hoped you'd see reason, that you'd understand the need to protect the family." "Even now," Lois cut him off, incredulous, "even after everything, you're still manipulating, still lying, still protecting her." "That's not fair," Margaret protested. "We're trying to salvage what's left." "Of your reputation," Lois finished, "not the relationship with your daughter." Never that. Florence stepped further into the room, her movement oddly steady compared to her frantic voice. They never cared about either of us, Lois. Only the precious Navarro name. For the first time in years, Lois found herself agreeing with her sister. You're right about that, at least. Thomas rose, swaying slightly. You ungrateful, both of you. After everything we've given you. You gave everything to Florence, Lois corrected coldly. And now that she's threatening you, suddenly I'm worth talking to again. Margaret reached for her hand. Lois, please. We can still fix this as a family. Lois pulled away. We're not a family. We're just people who share DNA and a talent for hurting each other. Florence laughed, the sound edged with hysteria. Finally, something we agree on. Thomas moved toward Florence, his expression dangerous. You need to stop this nonsense right now. I've indulged your tantrums for years, but... Tantrums? Florence stepped back, her face twisting. Is that what you call it when I point out your offshore accounts? Your tax fraud? The bribes to city officials? Margaret gasped. Florence, that's enough. She's right, Lois said quietly. It is enough. All of it. She turned to her parents, really seeing them perhaps for the first time not as the godlike figures of her childhood, but as deeply flawed people who had failed both their children in different ways. I didn't come here to help you silence Florence, she told them. And I didn't come to join forces with her against you. I came because, after everything, some small part of me still hoped there was something worth salvaging in this family. She looked around the study at the family photographs that didn't include her, at her father with his drink, her mother with her practiced concern, her sister with her desperate fury. There isn't, she concluded. You did this. All of you. You destroyed this family long before I came back to claim what was mine. Florence's laugh was bitter, so self-righteous, just like always. No, Lois shook her head. Just done. Done with all of you. She nodded to Lenny, who had been a silent witness to the whole scene. As they turned to leave, Thomas called after her. You walk out that door, don't come back, Lois. I mean it this time. Lois paused in the doorway, looking back at the man who had once been her hero. I already walked out once, Dad. Or don't you remember? You pushed me out. With Lenny at her side, she left the Navarro mansion for what she knew would be the last time. Behind them, Florence's voice echoed down the hallway. You did this. You destroyed this family. But all three of them knew it wasn't true. They had destroyed themselves, piece by piece, choice by choice, betrayal by betrayal. 3 months later, Lois stepped out of the Royale after a late meeting. The Miami night was warm and humid, the hotel's entrance glowing with tasteful lighting. Under her direction, the Royale had become even more exclusive, even more profitable, the flagship of her growing hospitality empire. As she waited for the valet to bring her car, a figure emerged from the shadows near the hotel's entrance. Lois tensed, then recognized her sister. Florence looked terrible. Her designer clothes had been replaced by jeans and a plain blouse. Her hair, once professionally colored and styled, was pulled back in a simple ponytail. Without her usual makeup, she looked older, tired, defeated. Been waiting long? Lois asked, nodding to the security guard who had moved protectively closer. Couple of hours, Florence admitted. Your staff wouldn't let me in. Following my instructions. Lois studied her sister, noting the dark circles under her eyes, the bitten nails, the general aura of desperation. What do you want, Florence? I'm sorry, Florence croaked, the words seemingly painful to utter. Please, Lois, help me. Lois raised an eyebrow. Sorry for what exactly? Framing me? Turning our parents against me? The years of sabotage and cruelty? For all of it. Florence's voice broke. I've lost everything. My accounts are frozen. My credit cards canceled. The condo's gone. I'm sleeping on an ex-friend's couch. Sounds familiar, Lois observed without sympathy. Almost like what happened to me. Florence stepped closer, her expression pleading. I know what I did was unforgivable. But you won, okay? You totally won. I'm asking no, I'm begging for mercy. Lois remained unmoved. 10 years ago I begged too. Outside our parents' house in the rain. Do you remember what you said to me? Florence's face crumpled. Please don't. You said, oh, grow up. Always the victim. Lois took a step closer. And now here you are, playing the victim. I have nothing left, Florence whispered. Nothing. That was the point, Lois said coolly. For you to understand exactly what you did to me. Florence grabbed her arm, desperation overriding caution. Please, just a job. Alone. Something to get back on my feet. Lois looked down at her sister's hand until Florence released her grip. Remember what you said to me all those years ago. Get that homeless woman out of here. Florence's face twisted in horror as Lois turned her back and walked toward her waiting car. I have nowhere to go. Florence called after her. Our parents won't even take my calls anymore. Lois paused, her hand on the car door. That's the thing about burning bridges, Florence. Eventually, you run out of places to stand. She slid into the back seat, nodding for the driver to go. As the car pulled away, she caught a last glimpse of her sister in the rearview mirror, a small, solitary figure standing in the glow of the hotel that should have been partly hers. For a moment, Lois felt the cold knot inside her loosen slightly. She had done it, taken everything from Florence, just as Florence had taken everything from her. The scales were balanced at last. Why didn't it feel like victory? Lois stood on the balcony of her penthouse, watching the sunset paint Miami's skyline in shades of gold and pink. 6 months had passed since her final encounter with Florence. 6 months of growth for her business empire. 6 months of silence from her family. The door slid open behind her. Lenny joined her at the railing, offering a glass of champagne. To the newest acquisition, he said, raising his own glass. The Navarro Grand becomes Sunrise Miami tomorrow. Lois took the glass, but didn't drink. The last piece. The last piece, he agreed. You now own everything that once belonged to your family. The hotels, the restaurants, the real estate. Thomas and Margaret retired to Palm Beach. Florence. He hesitated. Go ahead, Lois prompted. I can handle it. Florence is working as a waitress in Fort Lauderdale, living in a studio apartment. Starting over, I guess. Lois nodded, unsurprised. Her investigators had kept tabs on all 3 Navarros, though she'd given strict instructions not to interfere in their lives anymore. You never told me, Lenny said after a moment. Why didn't you press charges against them? Thomas's financial crimes, Florence's fraud, you had enough evidence to put them both in prison. Lois finally sipped her champagne, considering the question. Prison would have been too merciful, too quick. This way, they have to live with what they lost, what they threw away. And you? Lenny asked, watching her carefully. What are you living with? She turned to face him, this friend who had stood by her through everything, the only person who had never doubted, never abandoned her. I'm living with the knowledge that I became exactly what they made me, she admitted. Cold, ruthless, willing to destroy anyone who crossed me. You survived, Lenny corrected. You fought back. There's a difference. Is there? Lois turned back to the view. Sometimes I'm not sure. They stood in companionable silence, watching the last rays of sun disappear. In the distance, the Royale's distinctive silhouette was outlined in tasteful lights, a beacon on the shoreline. To revenge, Lenny finally said, raising his glass again. Lois clinked her glass against his, her lips curving into a satisfied smile despite her lingering doubts. To justice. She thought of Florence, once the queen of Miami's elite, now just another forgotten face in the crowd. She thought of her parents, living quiet lives of diminished splendor, their legacy in her hands. And she thought of herself the discarded daughter who had returned to claim everything they had denied her. The cold knot inside her hadn't disappeared, but it had changed, transformed into something more complex. Not peace exactly, not happiness, but perhaps something like vindication. Lois Navarro, once thrown away, now untouchable, watched her empire of lights spread out before her and knew that despite everything, she had won.